Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tuesdays with Trailblazers, brought to you by AdTech Edge, the video podcast where we bring you the latest trends and insights in advertising and technology. I'm your host, Adesh, and today we have with us Bob Regular, CEO at Infolinks Media. Bob has over 25 years of experience in the digital media industry and has founded and built digital businesses that have exceeded $1 billion in total revenue. So, without further ado, let's welcome Bob. Hey Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for asking. So, Bob, I would love for you to share a bit about your career journey. What key decisions or turning points shaped your path to becoming the CEO of Infolink, and what are some of the most important lessons you've actually learned along the way?
Well, it's a very beautiful broad question. I will do my best not to bore you through the journey. I got started in the mid 90s, which is a long time ago now, and not many people will remember back to them, but we had dial-up modems and the web was just getting started. And I actually started in television, and I pivoted that opportunity of working in television to creating a web development business, which was super innovative and cool in the mid to late 90s. And the web development business was the opportunity to create websites and then sort of look, they could be e-commerce sites or content sites on behalf of companies, and then to look for monetization. How could they make money from them? And back then, advertising was an obvious thing, but it was not matured or industrialized at the time. It didn't really have a commercial business. You were selling advertising maybe one off, but there was no such thing as exchanges. There were no such things as ad servers. It was evolving there. And so in the late 90s, I helped build a company that was essentially an ad network at the time. And, that ad network transformed into the concept of having an ad server that you could work across multiple publishers and sell directly into advertisers. And so it was the very early days and birth of digital media. And in those early days, we take it for granted today, right? And I don't want to dwell so much on the past, but those days, it wasn't absolutely clear whether or not digital media was going to be what it's become. It wasn't clear whether it was going to really be a movement, a disruptive force. I believed it was. I was in my 20s, and I was one of the biggest evangelists, super excited, telling everybody that would listen to me that .com, they should have a .com and they should have a website and they should put advertising on it. And I was, full of enthusiasm, advocating and evangelizing a brand new market. And then, as time evolved, we've gone through numerous really wild cycles, right? We've had the .com crash, which was, in many ways tragic, right? But to sort of think about it in sort of philosophical terms, it was like a rebirth renewal, right? Everybody got realistic. What are we really doing here? What are we really building here? What is our purpose? And so we sort of went through building more ad network oriented, supply oriented, demand oriented ad networks at the time. So in the early days, I was a part of the ad exchange movement, which was started really by Right Media. And we were one of the first, we were the first seat holder, my company at the time, which was called Iridian. We became the first seat holder on Right Media, which was the very first company that formed this notion that advertising could be traded and it could be sold in an auction model. So there's been a lot of evolution since then. I've been building companies that have been demand side on behalf of advertisers, so more DSP, more ad campaign optimization and modeling side. And then in the latest iteration with Infolinks, it's been supply side. And so Infolinks is a company that's been around for quite a while, since 2007. And it was one of the early companies to start contextual advertising as a type. It would do what's called in-text advertising, which was the highlighting of the keyword on the page, and you could click it and get a bubble of the advertiser. We still do that. So it was one of the genesis of contextual advertising. And we've since evolved the business in an extraordinarily wonderful way, because it has evolved in the direction that the market has also evolved. We haven't chased the market. The market in many respects is run parallel with our vision, which is we believe to be direct with the publisher and not really be an intermediary of the publisher. We have a direct relationship with all of our publishers. And we believe being direct is very important, because you you have the authenticity of the publisher and the audience when you're direct. We typically go take a position on the inventory and put either our own ad unit or take a position on a proprietary placement with a publisher, so that that unit is something that we can sell to advertisers and give them assurances that this is a unique position or a unique placement that's on the publisher. And so the purposes of that and the way we've been moving, which is the way the market has been moving, is we believe in direct proprietary placement as a function of creating the best real estate for the advertiser. And then we work and sell directly to the advertiser to match them, marry them to the quality of that placement so that they get the best outcomes and the best performance. So it's been a long, very cool 25-year journey. It's I counted, it's been 4 companies and multiple acquisitions and exits, and lots of learnings. I grew up in this industry and I love it. It's like fast changing, and it is not for the light of heart, right? It is every month there's a new opportunity and a new tragedy, and you have to like that, right? You have to enjoy the madness. And I think that there's a certain disorder that you have to enjoy to be, whether you're demand side or in the middle or on the supply side, to be a part of it. So it's been a great journey. I've really enjoyed it so far. I'm going to keep going with it. There's lots of new cool things that are coming and going to happen, and I'm enjoying innovating.
Great insights, then I think there are very important lessons to learn from your journey. Now, you've seen countless hype cycles in ad tech, right? Like you were saying. So, from your perspective, what do you think the industry, why do you think, or what do you think the industry keeps getting wrong about efficiency in programmatic?
Sure. Well, I think since I was in the early days with Mike Walrath and Brian O'Kelly during the basically forming of Right Media and the concept of programmatic, the concept of efficiency. I think that when you look at the birth of this, you look at the issue that there is so much complexity before there was programmatic. In order for you to buy media, it was very complicated. There were many ad networks. There were many methodologies to buy. And programmatic was formed in many ways to bring democratization to media, accessibility to media, and simplicity, the ability to take a simple concept and be able to buy media without all this complexity and systems. And so I always use the parallel, and I think it's a really valuable parallel, although I unfortunately it doesn't resonate with everyone, is in finance, if you wanted to buy a stock, you had to call a broker and you had to talk to them about it. And then they had to go tell somebody on the floor, and that person had to buy and trade a stock, right? Very inefficient when you have a lot of scale. Right? It's just extremely crazy to think that you've got to talk to somebody every time you want to buy and sell your stock. We take that for granted today, right? We take for granted that this is just, silly. But media was traded and sold the same way. It still is in many respects on television and radio and what have you. So programmatic was invented really just to disintermediate all of that and allow you to just simply, not different than e-commerce or auctions, your ability to go and buy and sell advertising at the blink of an eye at the speed and efficiency that you'd want to. So programmatic evolved many terminals. I call them terminals. They're now known as DSPs, that are on-ramps for you to be able to buy and optimize and perform. And it's just so obvious, right? It's so logical that you would want to be able to have control and to do that. So I think that efficiency is very, very logical, and everyone got on board with it. I think where, in the evolution or the maturity of it, and it's rising up, is now you have so many ways to buy. You have so many sellers selling. You have so many sort of side programmatic platforms. There's so much, right? You can be in the walled gardens, and there's multiple walled gardens. You can be outside the walled gardens with independent players, but those independent players don't have access to the walled gardens. It's really like a little bit like going to Disneyland, trying to figure out which ride are you going to get on. And so I think that what's happened is, while programmatic is efficient, you have so many entities and methodologies from which you can activate programmatic that's made it extremely complicated. And so everyone is seeking efficiency of being able to make the buying more efficient, simplify the buying. Attribution is a very complicated topic. So everyone's trying to figure out, how do you do attribution in many different scenarios? If I do attribution on radio, how do I bring that into CTV? How do I bring that to display? It's become complicated, but I would say that, it's extraordinary. In 25 years, we have gone from, if you wanted to put a banner on a publisher, you would email the publisher and they would physically put it on and just charge you for the time.
True.
And you would have to do that one by one, to where trillions now of requests of ad opportunities transact every day. And it's all bidding and buying, and it's all algorithmic, and there's good data, and there's attribution. So in 25 years, we've gone from absolutely nothing, right, to this monster, this trillion-dollar industry of programmatic. And the industry, it's fascinating because the industry is sort of a wannabe Hollywood. It's always wanted to be Hollywood. It's always wanted to be glamorous and cool. And so it really enjoys the notoriety around the advertising industry itself. And part of that coolness is the seeking by everybody all the time to make it better and cooler and more innovative. Evolution. How do we use AI, and how do we use better ML, machine learning? How do we use better marketing techniques? And there's like this constant hunger to be better, right? And to be glamorous. And I think that's driven the innovation like crazy. And that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing.
I actually love that distinction, right? So basically, you argued that smarter parts, not shorter ones, are the key. So can you unpack what smarter means in practice?
Sure. So there's been this movement driven by some of the players in our industry, some of the smart players in our industry. It could be, Jounce Media, it could be the Trade Desk. Very smart luminaries in the industry with philosophies on the idea that efficiency is a function of the pathways, right? And I think that's true. That's absolutely true. There's no doubt that if you are on using the parallel, right? If you've ever driven New Jersey on the New Jersey Turnpike, sometimes you wonder, why is it there's so many spaghetti highways if you want to go in a straight line? Why are you taking so many detour exits to go in a straight line? It's illogical, right? It feels inefficient. I think that is the first table stakes reality of efficiency. I think the secondary, more maturing process is what I sort of coined as the concept of smarter paths, which is, sometimes the best path isn't always just the direct path. Sometimes the best path that you need to look at is the one that's driving the best outcomes for you, that's driving the best business relationship for you, that may be driving the best quality, whatever that means to you, for you. And it's not just simply, is this the most efficient path, the only direct path? And so I think we are coming out of the phase where advertisers and intermediaries necessarily are just being bogged down in it just must be the most efficient direct path. And there's more nuance. It's less of a machete and more of a scalpel of what is the smarter path to get the best value, yield, performance, business relationship for the advertiser or for the DSP or for the entity, so that they get the goals that they're seeking, right? Everyone's got different goals. There's no such thing as one outcome. So, for example, you may really care about price, but price may have an inverse relationship to quality of outcome. So you may be getting the cheapest path, but you may not be getting the best outcome. Right? Which path are you going to pick? Are you going to pick the straight path that's cheaper, or are you going to pick maybe a not slightly straight path, right, that gets you the best outcome? And I think that the first phase is just go straight. And I think now the phase that we're moving in is a more maturing, more wise phase of let's use a scalpel, let's evaluate the right pathways, the smart pathways that generate the best outcomes that you're trying to pursue. And that's where I came up with this term, right, of smarter paths, not necessarily just the shorter ones. And I'm seeing definitely a lot more of that. Our industry, Sid, loves movements, right? We're like a movement hungry industry. We love movements. And one of the movements has been the efficiency movement for a long time. And then what always happens is we hypercorrect on something like efficiency or on a movement. And then we pendulum back a little bit and realize we overcorrected and we need balance. And I think that's kind of where we're headed.
Well, thank you so much for shedding light on that one. Now, Bob, for years, curation was treated as a side play, but you've said it now, it's now at the center of programmatic ecosystem. Why do you think that?
Yeah, so curation is a really interesting term. It's actually a very bright term for what it is. When we think about curation, as a lifestyle, you curate all day long the things that you care about. You may curate the type of fruits and vegetables that you get. You may curate the type of movies that you watch, or how you pick the content that you read. You're curating all the time what matters to you and what matters to what you determine as your performance, right? For you. And I think curation as a movement started off with the ecosystem of inventory is so big, and the ecosystem of audience is so big that advertisers, in this craziness of trying to find simplicity, would just like simpler ways to get exactly what it is they want, not constantly trying to grind down to what they want from a wide aperture. And so the numerous curation companies and methodologies came along to provide inventory pools or audience pools to advertisers that fit what the advertiser is trying to achieve, instead of giving them something really broad. Now, this is not really new, right? Like the concept of targeting, narrow targeting and optimizing down to your audience. This is not a new concept. The question really is, do you want to do it on the demand side, or do you want it to be provided to you by the supply side? So I think there's this movement, again, going back to movements, I think there's this movement going on, and has been going on for the better part of 2 to 3 years, where the supply side wants a participation in defining audiences and selling those audiences and curating those audiences and inventory. And the demand side continues to want to do it. And the two of them are in a little bit of a struggle, right? Between who owns the burden or opportunity of curating the audiences and the supply. And this is creating some friction, as you'd expect, and it's creating some, pushing and pulling between who's better at it. It's creating some accusations around, is a curator doing a good job? Are they adding value? Is a DSP doing a good job at targeting? Are they adding value? And it goes back to what I said very earlier, Sid. The industry loves innovation, and it loves this constant seeking of getting better, right? Innovating. And that's a part of it. So on the curation, question, I would say that curation is rewriting the rules, and it's bringing us fully retro. And what I mean by that is, when you rewind the clock back to the early 2000s, we had ad networks. And I told you I built a couple of ad networks over those years. And we had ad networks, and ad networks where you controlled the advertiser relationship and you controlled the supply relationship. And then it exploded and broke apart, and the demand side platforms became different from the supply side platforms. And the two of them were completely unique entities. I think in many ways, we're starting to go back to where demand side platforms also want to be supply side platforms, and supply side platforms also want to be demand side platforms. And that is just really another version of an ad network, right? We may not call it that because, we evolve in our words and what terminologies we use, but I think it's kind of a movement back to wanting control and to maximize the business and the margin.
So you've pointed to proprietary inventory and context signals as rewriting the rules, right? So what's different about how they're being used now?
So Infolinks, for example, is very much proprietary inventory. We use this word and try not to use it in a cliche word, but we curate the inventory with the publisher by going direct, identifying the location of inventory we want. We do a relationship with the publisher to proprietarily curate that inventory, that unit, so that our unit that's there creates high performing value. It's not just any old unit that's there. It's got high value, high viewability, high performance, got the right audience targets. It's a very, very curated experience. And we define that as a proprietary placement. For us, that's a proprietary placement. When you have proprietary inventory, and that's our mission at Infolinks, what we are focused on doing is trying to work on the 80-20 rule, which is 20% of the inventory creates 80% of the performance. And we don't want to present inventory that doesn't generate intrinsic value. So we're trying to curate that inventory to get the proprietariness of what we want, so that what we present to our advertisers is the highest value for them. Because the frustration on the advertiser front is, they're trying to just be very, very efficient. They don't want to see much that doesn't match what they're trying to target and get the most value. So that's what we think of as proprietary inventory. And then from a contextual signal perspective and rewriting the rules of contextual is, Infolinks itself was pretty much one of the early pioneers of contextual. And during those years, contextual is you read the page, You identify the depth of keywords. You pick the keywords that seem to have the most relevance and depth, and you use those keywords as keyword-based targeting. We've now evolved that into leveraging the brilliance of AI, of course, right? Where AI can read the page. AI can come up with many sentiment orientations, right? You can almost even say emotion, but sentiment orientations of what is this page really about? What is the audience really interested in if they're reading this page? How does the relationship between the content and the audience, right, bridge together? And so we're leveraging that now to take contextual to a completely other level where we're translating what's written, utilizing the benefits of AI and converting it into much more sophisticated sentiment of context, not just a keyword context only. And I think that gives us a tremendous edge because now you have the marriage of proprietary inventory that has been selectively curated, and you've got the curation of the context of what's on the page. And then you layer on top of that proprietary audience data. And these are all just really fancy concepts, right? That for the sole purpose of whatever the advertiser's mission and target is, to matching it efficiently, right? You're doing all of this fancy work on the supply side so that you can match the advertiser's desire, what their mission is. And so that's really what we've done, and why we perceive like proprietary inventory is important. One of the analogies I like to use all the time is, you can walk into Costco and you can get mass volumes of inventory and product, right? Cereal boxes the size of your leg, and that's okay. And that's a lot like the classic SSPs, right? The classic SSPs operate in mass scale, and we're much more of a boutique. We're much more like, in the US anyway, like a Trader Joe's, like a boutique grocery store where we're curating the best vegetables, the best foods, the best spices, the best that's there. We're not interested in cereal boxes the size of our, and we're just helping the advertisers find that narrow value of exactly the best of what it is they're trying to get to. And I think that's the basic philosophy around this. One is not bad, one's not good. It's just what is your mission?
That's good to know. So moving ahead, how is curation reshaping relationships between buyers and publishers currently?
Well, I would say everybody in the food chain is working very hard to get closer to each other. The buyer is trying to get closer to the publisher. The publisher is trying to get closer to the buyer. We are now, as I mentioned earlier, we're now going through cycles where everybody was close together in an ad network form that evolved and exploded out, where buyers and demand side platforms went on their own and in their own discipline, and supply side platforms and publishers went into their own discipline, and the two became DSPs and SSPs, and data companies became DMPs, and you had specific expertise in those arenas. And I thought this is where it would probably stay. And I would have to say that I was wrong, right? I did not predict that it would in many ways come back full circle together. Now, I don't think it will fully come back together, but I think it will partially come back together, where sell side, what you now know as SSPs, are going to have a serious discipline in being direct with advertisers, and the direct with advertisers and DSPs will have a substantial direct with publishers relationship. And this is going to be very nuanced, and this is what's happening between sellers and buyers right now. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not necessarily, it's an evolution. It's all driven from that each side thinks they can do a better job of each other's roles and innovating. And eventually there will be a balance. There will be an equilibrium where they'll realize that they can only do so much of each other's role. And so this is in transition right now. And for Infolinks specifically, we have always been on the sell side directly with our publishers and working with all the platforms and DSPs. And we've always been working directly as much as possible with advertisers and growing direct advertiser relationships. It's not a huge shift for us, but I would say because of the market shift, we increasingly now are going more and more direct advertisers. We love that intimate relationship, because now you can actually get very micro with the advertiser and their needs. It's not a transactional relationship. It's more of a very mindful of the goals and how to help you and solve problems with you relationship. And I think I think in the end, that's a very good thing. So I feel a bit bad for the agencies, because if you're in the agency world, you're going to get attacked, in a positive way, right? Not in a violent way, but you're going to get attacked by a lot of sellers. A lot of publishers now are selling direct to advertisers, and I remember in the early days when this was the setup, and the agencies were inundated by sellers because every publisher had a sales team, and as a result, agencies would have to field endless amounts of incoming as the opportunity of places to buy. And so the agencies loved programmatic, the evolution of programmatic, because it eliminated a lot of that. And so now I think we are going partially full circle.
Great insights, Bob. Just want to ask you one more thing. Advertisers currently often chase efficiency through shortcuts, right? So why do you think optimizing for outcomes delivers more sustainable performance?
So when the industry was born, and websites were putting ads on them, evangelism, what I kind of term the evangelistic cycle in the beginning, probably the first 5, 6, 7 years, we had to go tell advertisers, why do you want to advertise on the internet? Why is this important, right? They were very happy to advertise in radio and print and television, and the web looked, antiquated. In fact, you had these little banners, and it just didn't look that appetizing. And what made the web a force that really, really destroyed in many respects those other industries, they're not totally destroyed, but they were very, very impacted by it, is the fact that the web and the internet could deliver measurable performance. Okay. You would buy on television, you would struggle to measure your performance. You would buy on radio, you would struggle to measure your performance. Print was completely a black box of performance. And so there are many, many coined cliches about, advertising. No one ever quite knows what percentage of their money is performing or not. The internet changed all of that. And advertisers, I almost would call it the performance enlightenment. And the reason for that performance enlightenment was you have a situation where you could finally, as an advertiser, measure clearly performance at scale. You could understand, I put my ads on these websites, I got clicks, and I generated sales. And so performance is the core DNA of this whole industry. This industry is born because of performance. It breathes because of performance. So now we've kind of moved into, and I think some of the reasons is because it's just maturation and the economy is sort of softening a little bit, and is now there's all this talk about outcomes, which is really just a derivative word of performance and looking for outcomes. So I would say that, advertisers have always been chasing performance and outcomes. Those outcomes are different for every advertiser, what matters to them. To an airline, they're trying to sell seats on their plane. To a hotel, they're trying to sell nights in bed on their hotels. To an insurance company, they're trying to sell insurance policies. To Ford, they're trying to get you to take test drives. Everybody has a mission and an outcome that they're trying to achieve. And I think they've always been chasing it. I don't think the hunt for outcomes is new. What I think is unique and what's happening is, how do we do a better, more efficient, more effective job at driving those outcomes in a very, very crowded environment this goes back to what I was originally saying at the beginning of the session. When you have so many on-ramps of how you can buy media and so many places to buy media, so many platforms, it's overwhelming. Right? It feels extremely inefficient. How do you get your arms around it? So MarTech is inundated by using multiple platforms just to activate a campaign. And so it feels overwhelming. It feels expensive. And I think that it's reached sort of this crescendo where everyone's looking for simplicity and looking for it to become easier. Performance is just a derivative outcome of that. And I don't think that's really ever changed, to be honest.
Great to know that. Now, what's the next hype cycle you expect to dominate AdTech, and what's the reality about?
Well, I mentioned earlier in the podcast where AdTech is very Hollywood. We love to be Hollywood, right? It's sort of a function of being in the advertising industry. And so we love our hype cycles. It's just apparently we're always chasing the next super duper cool thing that's going to reinvent advertising and make it better. And I think you can't deny, and it's pretty obvious, that the latest hype cycle is. And just like I can rewind the clock and I can remember as if it was yesterday that the .com was going to change the world. the web was going to change the world. It was going to bring e-commerce. It was going to disrupt the world, and it was going to change everything as we knew it. And that was the messaging in the late 90s. And that messaging turned out to be true. It just took a lot longer than anyone realized. It's really taken, a couple of decades, but it has transformed the world. I think AI will also transform both the world and advertising. I think it will have tremendous impacts on targeting, on advertising operationally, the operations of advertising and how you buy media. I think it'll have tremendous impacts on the ad experience itself, right? The creative experience, the ad experience, the interaction with ads. And I just think it's going to get into every part of the ad tech, martech industry and transform it. But just like the dot-com cycle in the late 90s, there was an expectation it would happen very fast right away. And I think that while it is going very quickly, I do think that it will be much longer and it will be much more complex, and there will be a lot more failure with it than is right now, that is anticipated right now. I think we're in sort of like this halo moment. AI will transform and fix everything, right? But the reality is that this is very complicated stuff, and it will take time for the AI to learn and become really, really useful at a practical level. And so I can see, it taking, quite a long time to really get through the whole ad tech, martech system. But there's no doubt it's the latest. I would give it the next 10 years of great transformation that's going to come as a result of the AI cycle in ad tech. And it's going to touch every industry, but I think it'll have a profound impact on ad tech itself.
I mean, right here you said the case in the current form, and I believe transformation and change happens in phases, right? So assuming we're quite at the start of that phase right now, it's going to take a couple of more phases to get to where we actually want to get the data, right? So what's your feeling about that?
So I've been in this industry my entire basically core career. The bulk of what I know is ad tech and martech. It's almost into my cells at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So the transformation of AI in our space will be tremendous. I think the transformation of AI in other industries certainly will be different, but I think it's going to completely recast how we operate in some of the things that we've taken for granted our whole lifetimes. The only thing that will kind of cause friction, will slow it down, is the fact that people can only change so fast before it creates stress and anxiety and disruption. And frankly, eventually it can create even things like, civil unrest, right? Change can be dangerous if it's too fast for the pace of humanity. And so I think while AI has got a tremendous amount of capability, people in the end have to be accepting of deploying it. And so I think that we went really fast. I remember when the iPhone came out and it started to change advertising as a place to advertise and the experience of advertising. And we are now almost 20 years since that happened. We're about 18 years since it happened. And we no longer get excited when Apple drops another iPhone because it's not that interesting anymore, right? Whereas not long ago, there were lines down the street, right? I think that, you get these 20-year bans, 15 to 20-year bans. And I think that change and adoption is a 15 to 20-year, span of time. So every industry, I think, is going to be affected, but it's going to have to follow that arc of time in order for us to tolerate and accept it and not just be, stressed out and anxious about it. And as far as, as it relates to other industries, some are going to be wildly changed, wildly. I just can't believe what it's going to do to some of these other industries that, are fully dependent on knowledge from people. People and their knowledge is what the currency is. Now, if that knowledge is inside of AI and accessible democratically, what do people with that knowledge do, right? What's their contribution? Anyway, it's a weird answer to your question, but I think that, it's all going to fly, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a lot of pontificating about what's happened. Ad tech is very, very, very complicated. It sounds like it should be easy. We're putting ads on publishers, right?
Absolutely.
At a very 50,000 foot level, it sounds actually extremely trivial. But once you get into all the nuance of how it actually operates both technically and physically, and then separately, operationally, it's extremely complicated. I'm very fortunate because I've been in it for so long and I've done so many parts of it. I've been a seller, I've been a buyer, I've been an advertiser, I've been a data, a DMP, I've been a DSP, I've been an SSP, and I've led product. My joy is that I've gotten to do all those things. So now I have a very well-rounded understanding. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any of it, but I'm incredibly nuanced and knowledgeable about each part. And when I talk to people that are incredibly smart, that know ad tech, there's so many blind spots that we can have because it's so complicated. It's so much depth in it. It truly is like Malcolm Gladwell says, right? You need 10,000 hours to really become an expert in anything. And I think he's right. It's just an absolute truth. I think at this phase, because of the complexity, you want to be an expert in your arena, right? If you are a buyer or marketer, be an expert in your arena, right? Really, really get down to the little nuances of your arena. I think it's almost now too hard. It's not too hard, but it's a lot to digest all sides of this thing. It's crazy.
Thank you so much for the wonderful insights, Bob. Really enjoyed hosting you on our podcast, Tuesdays with Trailblazers. And thank you all for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, stay tuned with AdTech Edge for more insights. Till we meet again, signing off, your host, Siddesh.